Hi ka-learners! Masaya po kaming makasama kayong muli. Sa ating nakaraang lesson, ibinahagi namin sa inyo ang kasaysayan ng United Nations at ang kahalagahan ng mga peacekeepers o tagapag-ingat ng kapayapaan sa ating mundo. Ngayong araw, ipagpapatuloy natin ang pag-aaral sa mga iba pang layunin at gawain ng UN, lalo na sa panahon ng digmaan at kaguluhan. After studying this lesson, you should be able to identify the different roles and activities that the United Nations undertakes in maintaining peace, and discuss the peacekeeping missions of the UN. Since the end of World War II, various peacekeeping activities have been launched by the United Nations to prevent the outbreak of another world war. Mula sa mga pag-uusap sa pagitan ng Israel at Palestinian leaders hanggang sa pagtutok sa mga pangyayari sa Middle East, UN peacemaking tries to bring hostile or conflicting parties to agreement through diplomatic means. The Security Council, in its efforts to maintain international peace and security, may recommend ways to avoid conflict or restore or secure peace through negotiation. The UN deploys peacekeepers in areas of conflict to help keep opposing parties apart. The UN peacekeepers are military force sponsored by the UN, made up of soldiers from non-combatant countries. Peacekeeping is not an easy nor safe job, but surely it is a noble one. Among the many duties of peacekeepers are the following. Peacekeepers help create buffer zones or neutral areas. Buffer zones are areas where hostile or conflicting parties can talk their disagreements over. Peacekeepers must keep these areas free from violence at all times. Peacekeepers help implement agreements. They see to it that the opposing parties follow what they have agreed upon. This simply means that peacekeepers monitor the actions of the parties involved. If two opposing parties agree to a ceasefire, the peacekeepers supervise them to prevent any violent incident from happening. Peacekeepers may also help organize and supervise elections. They help ensure that the elections will be fair and clean. Does East Timor sound familiar to you? The UN supervised its elections in order to make sure that there would be no untoward incidents during the voting. The UN peacekeepers watch for any violence that might occur during and after the elections. Listed are some guidelines for the operation of peacekeeping forces. Peacekeeping forces are dispatched with the consent of the disputing parties. Peacekeepers are lightly armed and can use force only for self-defense. Peacekeepers must remain neutral and not intercede in the internal affairs of the host country. They must maintain strict impartiality in the conflict. The effects of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were really devastating. The bombs killed hundreds of thousands of people. Do you know that because of the potentially devastating effects of nuclear weapons, the UN has committed itself to eradicating these deadly weapons? The UN swore to preserve global peace by reducing, if not totally eradicating, nuclear weapons. A major goal of the UN is disarmament. This means halting the spread of arms, as well as reducing and eventually eliminating all weapons of mass destruction. Weapons that can kill a large amount of people at once. The UN has an ongoing forum or discussion for disarmament negotiations with its member states. Among the agreements that have been produced by such negotiations are the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1996, and other treaties that establish nuclear-free zones or areas. The UN encourages all nations to adhere to these agreements that ban the use of destructive weapons of war. It also supports efforts to control small arms and light weapons. Maraming tao ang naghihirap dahil sa digmaan. Ang United Nations ay may layunin na pangalagaan ang mga sibilyan sa panahon ng kaguluhan. They ensure their safety and provide for their daily needs. These activities of the UN are called humanitarian missions. Such missions have been conducted to relieve the suffering of the victims, both the civilians and the combatants. Examples of humanitarian interventions are the deployment of doctors and nurses and the evacuation of refugees from war-torn areas. The UN also engages in peace building. Peace building refers to post-conflict measures taken by the UN to strengthen and solidify peace in order to avoid the recurrence of the conflict. The UN believes that development assistance is a key element of peace building. It helps countries rebuild the administrative, health, educational, and other services disrupted by the conflict. Examples of the peace-building missions of the UN are its supervision of the 1999 elections in East Timor, the 1989 elections in Namibia, and the mine clearance programs of Mozambique. Sana'y marami kayong natutunan mga ka-learners. Here are some important points to remember. In fulfilling the UN's obligation to maintain peace, it relies on the following peace operations: disarmament, peacemaking, peacekeeping, humanitarian intervention, and peace building. The task of UN peacekeepers range from keeping apart hostile parties to helping them work peacefully together. This means peacekeepers help in implementing peace agreements between opposing parties, monitoring ceasefires, creating buffer zones or neutral zones, creating political institutions that work alongside governments, non-governmental organizations, and local citizens groups to provide emergency relief, demobilize former fighters, and reintegrate them into society. Clearing mines, explosives that are buried in the ground, and organizing and monitoring elections. It is important to note that peacekeepers are only dispatched with the consent of the countries or parties involved. Peacekeepers are neutral force. They are required to maintain their impartiality so as to avoid escalation of the conflict. Mga ka-learners, huwag niyong kalimutan na tumutok sa ating susunod na episode para masubukan ang inyong natutunan sa ating aralin. Patuloy niyo rin subaybayan ang ating paksa dahil marami pa tayong pag-uusapan tungkol sa mga international peacekeepers. See you on our next episode. Stay safe and be healthy, everyone!